The radio static cuts through the thin air at 6,000 meters like a jagged knife. It is July 27, 2024. A Pakistani military helicopter, a frantic steel bird battling the updrafts of the Karakoram, hovers dangerously close to the savage, unclimbed west face of K2. Inside, the pilot isn't looking for glory. He is looking for movement. Any movement. Below him, sprawled across the unforgiving canvas of gray granite and bulletproof blue ice, lie the figures. They are not tucked into sleeping bags. They are not sitting up signaling for help. They are tangled, motionless. To the untrained eye, they are just specks of color in a monochromatic world of death. But to the climbing community, those two specks represent the absolute pinnacle of human endurance. They are Kazuya Hirad and Kenro Nakajima, the samurais of the Alpine. These men were not wealthy tourists, dragged up the Abruzzi spur on fixed ropes. They were three-time winners of the Pilot d'Or, the Oscars of mountaineering. They were the best alpinists of their generation, attempting a line so audacious, so vertical, that most climbers wouldn't even dream of it in a nightmare. And yet, there they lie. The pilot strains his eyes against the glare. He checks his altimeter. They are at roughly 6,000 meters, but their last known coordinates were at 7,500 meters. Do the math. That is a fall of nearly 1,500 meters, almost a mile of vertical freefall. Here is the question that should haunt you, the question that freezes the blood in the veins of every expert climber watching this. How? How do two of the most technically gifted, meticulous, and safety-obsessed climbers in history make a fatal error simultaneously? Did the mountain simply shrug them off? Did an anchor fail? Or did something far more sinister happen in the thin air of the death zone, physiological catastrophe that doomed them before they even fell? This isn't just a climbing accident. This is a locked-room mystery where the room is 5 miles high, and the only witness is the wind. When the news broke, the headline was simple. Climbers fall on K2, but we don't do simple headlines here. We look at the forensics of the fall. We look at the decision-making in the hours leading up to the silence. We look at the chilling footage. The rescue helicopter brought back footage that tells a story the official reports glossed over. Whatever you think you know about high-altitude tragedy, forget it. This wasn't an avalanche. This wasn't a storm. This was something else. Welcome to K2 Stories. I'm your host, and today, we are conducting a forensic audit of the tragedy on the west face. We are going to strip away the romanticism of mountaineering and look at the cold, hard evidence of what happens when the best in the world meet the worst the planet has to offer. We are going back to July 27th. We are going into the void, because the bodies are still there, and they have a story to tell. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, you first have to unlearn everything you think you know about climbing K2. If your mental image of K2 involves long lines of tourists in bright down suits, clipping into fixed ropes set up by Sherpas, and sucking on oxygen bottles like they are scuba diving, delete that image. That is the Abruzzi spur. That is commercial mountaineering. Kazuya Hirad and Kenro Nakajima were operating in a completely different universe. They were the Navy SEALs of the Alpine world, while everyone else was playing paintball. Let's look at the dossier on Kazuya Hirad. 45 years old, a man who didn't just climb mountains. He engaged in a conversation with them. In the climbing world, there is an award called the Pilot d'Or, the Golden Ice Axe. It is the Nobel Prize of mountaineering. Winning it once defines a career. Hirad had won it 3 times. He was widely considered one of the top 5 alpinists walking the face of the earth. He was a mountain cameraman by trade, a man obsessed with aesthetics, precision, and minimizing risk. He wasn't an adrenaline junkie chasing a rush. He was a surgeon. And his partner Kenro Nakajima, 39 years old, strong, silent, and technically brilliant. He was the engine. If Hirad was the visionary architect, Nakajima was the master builder who could make the impossible structure stand. Together, they were a symbiotic organism. They had already conquered the south face of Shishper and the south face of Rakaposhi. These are names that might not mean much to the average person, but to climbers, they are synonymous with suicide missions if done incorrectly. They didn't just survive these climbs, they mastered them. So, when they arrived at K2 Base Camp in the summer of 2024, they weren't there to join the circus on the normal route. They were there for the west face. Let me contextualize the west face of K2 for you. Imagine a vertical wall of rock and ice, towering 3 kilometers into the sky, roughly 7 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. But unlike a skyscraper, this wall actively tries to kill you. It is battered by the prevailing westerly winds, meaning it takes the full force of the jet stream. It is a shooting gallery of falling rock and ice. It has only been climbed once, by a Russian team in 2007. That Russian team used siege-style tactics, heavy loads, fixed ropes, weeks of effort, and massive manpower. Hirad and Nakajima were attempting it Alpine style. This is the critical forensic detail you need to remember for later. Alpine style means you carry everything on your back. Tent, food, fuel, rope. No Sherpas carrying your load. No fixed ropes to slide down if you get tired. No supplemental oxygen. It is a single push. You start at the bottom, and you don't stop until you reach the top or you turn around. It is the purest form of climbing, but it removes the safety net entirely. If you break a leg in siege style, your team lowers you down the ropes. If you break a leg in alpine style on the west face of K2, you are dead. There is no rescue. Why would two men with families, with careers, with everything to live for, choose a style of climbing that offers zero margin for error? It comes down to a philosophy that Herode often spoke about, the ideal line. He wasn't interested in summits. He was interested in the unknown. He wanted to draw a new line on a blank canvas. But confidence, even expert confidence, can be a quiet killer. It can mask the variables you can't control. The preparation for this climb was meticulous. They arrived in Pakistan early. They acclimatized on lower peaks, tuning their bodies like Formula One engines to function in low-oxygen environments. In their final dispatch before leaving base camp, Herod looked calm. There was no bravado, just a quiet acknowledgement of the beast waiting above. But let's talk about the science of where they were going, because this provides the context for the physiological breakdown that might have occurred. They were heading into the death zone, scientifically defined as altitudes above 8,000 meters. But for technical climbers on a face this steep, the physiological deterioration starts much lower, around 6,500 meters. At this altitude, the atmospheric pressure drops. There is roughly 40% of the oxygen available compared to sea level. Even at rest, your heart is racing. Your blood thickens as your body desperately produces more red blood cells to catch oxygen, turning your blood into sludge, increasing the risk of stroke or heart attack. Digestion shuts down. The body literally begins to consume its own muscle tissue for energy. But the most dangerous effect isn't physical, it's cognitive. Hypoxia-oxygen deprivation is the silent assassin. It acts like extreme intoxication. It impairs judgment. It makes you feel warm when you are freezing. It makes a 50-degree slope look flat. It whispers to you that you are fine, right up until the moment you make a fatal mistake. Herod and Nakajima knew this. They had spent their lives managing this risk. They were acclimated, they were fit, they had the best gear money could buy. On the morning of July 27th, the weather reports looked stable. A window had opened. The wind on the west face, usually a roaring freight train, had quieted to a low rumble. It was the Goldilocks scenario, not too hot to cause avalanches, not too cold to freeze their extremities, and wind calm enough to stand upright. They left the safety of the erratic rock-strewn glacier and stepped onto the face. The plan was simple: climb fast, bivouac camp high, punch through the technical rock band's summit, and descend via the easier Abruzzi route. A traverse. It was an elegant plan, a plan that would cement their legacy as the greatest alpinists of the 21st century. For the first few hours, everything went according to the script. Their GPS trackers pinged regularly. Ping, 6,500 meters. Ping, 6,800 meters. Ping, 7,000 meters. They were moving efficiently. They were machines. But then, the pings stopped being consistent. Small delays, a pause where there shouldn't be a pause. In a standard documentary, this is where we would cut to a commercial. But in an investigation, this is where we zoom in. Because somewhere between 7,000 and 7,500 meters, the perfect plan collided with reality. We don't know yet if it was a loose rock, a sudden gust of wind, or a momentary lapse in concentration caused by that creeping hypoxia. But we know this: they were alone on a wall of ice, thousands of feet above the nearest human being, and something ... shifted. The context is set. You have two elite warriors, a perfect weather window, and a wall that demands perfection. They were prepared for everything, except perhaps, for the anomaly that was waiting for them in the gray zone. In criminal investigation, detectives look for the break in the pattern. Humans are creatures of habit, and elite climbers are creatures of extreme discipline. They don't deviate from the protocol unless an external force acts upon them, or an internal calculation goes terribly wrong. To understand the death of Hirad and Nakajima, we have to look at the digital footprint they left behind before the silence took over. We are analyzing the anomaly, the deviation from the script. The time is approximately 7 a.m. on July 27, 2024. The sun is hitting the west face. Based on standard alpine starts, the team would have been moving since before dawn, likely around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m., to capitalize on the frozen snowpack before the sun turned it into slush. The data point, their tracker data, indicated they had reached an altitude of roughly 7,500 meters, 24,600 feet. This is a critical elevation. It is the transition zone. Below this, you are mountaineering. Above this, you are surviving. At 7,500 meters on the west face, the terrain shifts. You are no longer on the massive snow slopes. You are entering the mixed rock bands, the fortress walls of the upper mountain. Here is the first anomaly, the rate of ascent. They were moving fast. In alpine style, speed is safety. You don't carry enough food to wait out a storm, so you race the weather. But speed brings a deadly trade-off. To the uninitiated, let me explain the mechanics of sumo climbing, because this is likely the smoking gun in this tragedy. In traditional climbing, one person climbs while the other stays stationary, anchored to the mountain, holding the rope. If the climber falls, the stationary person catches them. It is safe, but it is slow. painfully slow. On a face as big as K2, you don't have time for slow. So here at Nakajima we're almost certainly This means both men were moving at the same time, connected by a 60-meter rope. As the leader likely here climbs, he puts an ice screw or a piece of gear into the wall every 10 or 15 meters. The follower Nakajima cleans it up as he passes. Here is the terror of that system. If the second climber falls, he pulls the leader off. If the leader falls, he pulls the second climber off. Unless there is a solid piece of gear clipped between them at that exact second, a fall by one is a death sentence for both. It is a pact of mutual destruction relying entirely on the premise that we do not fall. The terrain trap, the west face of K2, is not clean granite like Yosemite. It is a geological nightmare. It is sedimentary rock layers of limestone and shale that have been smashed together by tectonic plates. It is chaos. It crumbles. You can grab a handhold that looks solid, the size of a microwave, and it will detach in your hand. At 7,500 meters, they hit the Black Pyramid Band equivalent of the west face. The anomaly here isn't the climbers, it's the mountain. The temperature that day was rising. When the sun hits the west face, it acts like a microwave. The ice that glues the loose rocks together begins to melt. We have to ask the investigative question. Did the mountain throw the first punch? A rock, the size of a fist, falling from 500 meters above, reaches terminal velocity. It doesn't just hit you, it explodes through you. If Harad, leading the pitch, was struck by falling debris, he would have been incapacitated instantly. In a simul climbing scenario, if he loses consciousness and falls, the shock load on the rope would transfer directly to Nakajima. Physics is cruel here. A falling body generates thousands of pounds of force. If Nakajima was mid-step, balancing on the front points of his crampon steel spikes only an inch long, he would have been ripped from the wall before his brain could even process the word fall. The missing distress call. This is the most haunting anomaly. Modern alpinists carry technology. Garmin InReach, satellite phones, radios. Harad was a professional. He carried communications gear. If they were stranded, they call. If one is injured, they call. If they are trapped by weather, they call. The silence was absolute. There was no mayday. There was no we are stuck. This tells us the catastrophe was instantaneous. It wasn't a slow decline. It wasn't a decision to retreat that went wrong. It was an event that happened in less than 5 seconds. It eliminates the theory of hypothermia or high-altitude cerebral edema, haste causing a slow collapse. Men dying of haste stumble. They sit down, they wander. They don't plummet 1,500 meters in complete silence. The anchor paradox. Let's analyze the fall distance. They fell from 7,500 meters to 6,000 meters. That is 1,500 meters. If they fell that far, it means there was zero friction slowing them down. If they had been belaying properly, one stationary, one moving, the anchor would have caught them, or at worst, failed, and they would have fallen a few hundred meters to the next ledge. A 1,500 meter fall implies a zipper failure. This happens when the protection points, the ice screws or cams, pull out one by one as the climbers fall past them. Ping, ping, ping. Like a zipper opening on a jacket. Or even more terrifying, they were running it out. In the pursuit of speed, and perhaps overconfident in their ability, were they climbing with no protection between them, just the rope connecting them. It's a common practice on easier sections of high peaks to save energy. You rely on your feet. If they were unattached to the mountain, just attached to each other on a 50-degree ice slope, one slip is all it takes. The weather shift anomaly while the forecast was clear. Local reports from other teams on the Abruzzi Spur, the other side of the mountain, noted wind shifts. K2 is a pyramid. It splits the jet stream. If the wind shifted 5 degrees to the north, the west face would turn into a vacuum, sucking up drafts at hurricane speeds. Imagine balancing on a ladder. Now imagine someone turns on a giant fan below you. The updraft can lift your rope, tangling it around your crampons. It can blind you with spindrifty's crystals moving so fast they scour your corneas. Did a sudden spindrift river wash over them? Spindrift is like an avalanche of dry sand. It flows like water. If a wave of spindrift hit them while they were traversing a delicate section, it wouldn't matter how strong they were. You cannot hold onto a mountain when you are drowning in ice dust. The psychological anomaly, summit fever versus professionalism. Harad was chasing a golden line. He had failed on this face before. There is a psychological trap called the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested time, money, and reputation. You are at 7,500 meters. You are feeling strong. The voice in your head says, just push through this loose rock section. The good ice is above. Did they push too hard on a section they should have protected? Did they trade safety for speed in a gamble that didn't pay off? We see the anomaly forming in the negative space and what didn't happen. They didn't camp. They didn't retreat. They didn't call for help. They were erased from the mountain in a singular, violent moment. So, we are left with a chilling realization. The anomaly wasn't a mistake. It was a probability event. They were playing Russian roulette with a mountain that had 5 bullets in the chamber. And on the morning of July 27th, the hammer finally clicked on a live round. But the investigation doesn't stop at the fall. It stops at the landing. Because what the helicopter pilots saw, and what the forensic analysis of that scene tells us changes the narrative from a climbing accident to a heartbreaking tableau of loyalty and loss. To understand what happened, we have to look at the bodies, we have to reconstruct the final millisecond, we have established the context, we have identified the anomaly. Now, we must do the hardest work of all. We must look at the scene itself. The images captured by the Pakistani military helicopter on July 27th are not public. They shouldn't be. But descriptions from the rescue team and the pilot, coupled with the known laws of physics and alpine pathology, allow us to construct a forensic profile of the crash site at 6,000 meters. We are treating the west face not as a mountain, but as a crime scene. And in this scene, the evidence tells a brutal, unemotional story of the final seconds. Exhibit A. The location of the bodies. The most telling piece of forensic evidence is not how they look, but where they are. Let's analyze the ballistics of that fall. On a slope of 45 to 50 degrees, a human body does not slide. It tumbles. It ricochets. The west face is not a smooth sheet of ice. It is a mixture of rock, ribs, and ice flutes. A fall of this magnitude takes roughly 20 to 30 seconds. That is an eternity. But here is the forensic detail that chills the bone. They were found together. This confirms our earlier hypothesis of the simul-climbing pact. If one man had fallen unroped, or if the rope had been severed by a sharp rock edge, a common occurrence in falls, the bodies would likely be separated by hundreds of meters, scattered by the chaotic terrain. The fact that they are close to each other, described as being within the same immediate proximity, tells us the rope held. The connection between Hirad and Nakajima did not break. The nylon held, the knots held, the harnesses held. What failed was the mountain itself. This indicates that as they fell, they were ragdolled together, a tangle of limbs and rope, bound by the very safety line meant to save them. The rope became a bolus, perhaps tangling around them, preventing any chance of Exhibit B. The gear configuration, the Alpine signature. A forensic zoom-in on their equipment would reveal the story of their intent. Unlike the commercial climbers on the Abruzzi Ridge, you would not see large yellow oxygen bottles strapped to their backs. Oxygen zero. This is critical for the reconstruction of the moment of impact. Without supplemental oxygen, their reaction times were fundamentally slower. But more importantly, it means they were light. The packs in Alpine style, you carry your life on your back. If the bodies were found with their backpacks still strapped on, it tells us they were in transit. They were not at a rest stop. They were not setting up a bivouac. If they were setting up a tent, the packs would be off. If they were resting, they might be clipped to an anchor. The fact that they appear to be geared up suggests the accident happened mid-stride. Exhibit C. The GoPro, the black box Kazuya Hirad, was not just a climber. He was a cinematographer. He documented everything. It is highly probable, bordering on certain, that one or both of them had a GoPro or a specialized camera mounted on their helmet or chest harness. That camera is currently sitting in the snow at 6,000 meters. If it survived the impact, its SD card contains the answer to the mystery. It holds the footage of the slip. It holds the audio of the wind, the crunch of the crampons, and perhaps, the final shout. But until that camera is recovered, Dan, almost impossible feat, we must rely on the silent forensics. The pathology of the landing. The rescue pilot reported that the climbers were motionless. We have to ask the difficult question. Did they survive the fall? Forensic pathology suggests it is unlikely. Reconstructing the sequence, the fatal 10 seconds based on the forensic evidence of the body's location and configuration, we can build a simulation of the event. T-minus 5 seconds. Hirad is leading. He is navigating a band of loose, sedimentary rock vachas. He tests a hold. It seems solid. He commits his weight. Nakajima is 30 meters below, moving in rhythm. They are in the flow state. T-minus 0 seconds. The event, the hold breaks. Or perhaps a crampon point shears off on invisible rock. Hirad slips. Falling, the scream is swallowed by the wind. T+1 second. Hirad drops. He falls 5 meters, 10 meters. The rope goes taut. The force hits Nakajima because they are running it out. Limited protection between them. The shock load is massive. It is not a gentle tug. It is a violent yank, likely exceeding 5 kilonewtons of force. Nakajima braces, kicks his crampons in. But the ice is thin. The leverage is wrong. He is ripped from the wall. T+5 seconds. They are both airborne. They strike the slope, bounce, and are airborne again. The zipper effect occurs. Any gear they did place below them is subjected to the weight of 2 falling men. The cams rip out of the crumbling rock. The ice screws lever out of the melting ice. They are now in free fall, tumbling down the precipice. T+30 seconds. The rest. They come to a stop at 6,000 meters. On a lower angled snow ramp, the silence returns instantly. The cloud of spindrift snow they kicked up settles over them like a shroud. The rope, the silent witness, lies coiled around them. The impossible rescue. Why are they still there? This is the final piece of the forensic puzzle. The helicopter hovered. The pilot looked, but he didn't land. The forensic reality of the west face is that a rescue at 6,000 meters on that specific terrain is a suicide mission. The helicopter cannot hover close enough to the wall without risking its rotors hitting the rock. The air is too thin to winch to body as dead weight without destabilizing the aircraft. To retrieve them, a ground team would have to climb the exact route that just killed the world asbestos. They would have to package the bodies in sleds and lower them 1,500 meters down a shooting gallery of falling rock. The risk-to-reward ratio is 0. So, the forensic conclusion is final. The crash site is not just a scene, it is a grave. The bodies of Hirad and Nakajima have become part of the mountain's geology. They are frozen in time, preserved in the eternal ice, wearing the gear they trusted, bound by the rope that connected them. But while their bodies remain, their legacy does not stay frozen on the slopes. The shock of their death sent a seismic wave through the climbing world that is still reverberating. The helicopter pulls away. The rotor wash kicks up a final cloud of snow, obscuring the two small dots on the vast gray canvas of K2. As the machine banks left, heading back toward the safety of Skarju, the silence rushes back in to fill the void. It is a silence that screams. We have looked at the shock. We have analyzed the context. We have reconstructed the forensic timeline of the fall. But now, we are left with the heaviest debris of all, the aftermath. The question flooding the comment sections, the forums, and the minds of everyone watching this is simple, human, and agonizing. Why? Why are they still there? Why don't we go get them? This brings us to the brutal calculus of high-altitude rescue. In the civilized world, if a tragedy happens, we recover the fallen. We have funerals. We have closure. But K2 is not the civilized world. It is a sovereign state of geology and ice, and it has its own laws. To mount a recovery mission for Hirad and Nakajima would require a team of at least 6 to 8 elite climbers. They would have to ascend the very route that just killed the best alpinists in history. They would have to work under the threat of the same falling rocks, the same shifting ice, the same deadly gravity. They would have to package 2 frozen bodies, heavy, uncooperative dead weight, and lower them down a 1,500-meter vertical bowling alley. The math is cruel but necessary. You do not risk for living hearts to retrieve 2 that have stopped beating. And so, the west face of K2 becomes their tomb. They join the ghostly roster of the mountain's eternal residents. But unlike the bodies on Everest, often passed by commercial tourists, Hirad and Nakajima lie in a place of solitude. They rest in a cathedral of rock where almost no one goes. There is a strange, dark poetry in that. They lived for the remote, the untouched, the pure, and that is exactly where they will stay. But the resonance of this tragedy goes far beyond the location of the remains. It shakes the very foundation of what it means to be an explorer in the modern age. Kazuya Hirad spent his life chasing what he called the ideal line. He wasn't just climbing for sport, he was climbing for art. He wanted to draw a line on a mountain that was aesthetically perfect, difficult, and new. He succeeded in life, and perhaps, in a twisted way, he succeeded in death. He died doing exactly what he was built to do, alongside the partner he trusted most. However, we must strip away the romance for a moment. We must look at the cost. Hirad leaves behind a wife and children. Nakajima leaves behind a family. The samurai code of honor is noble, but the grief left behind is jagged and real. The climbing community often glorifies the death in the mountains, framing it as a warrior's exit. But looking at the empty space at the dinner table, the glory of the west face feels incredibly thin. This tragedy serves as a terrifying reality check for the world of alpinism. For years, technology has made us feel invincible. We have better weather forecasting, lighter gear, heated socks, satellite phones. We started to believe we had tamed the savage beasts. We thought that if you were skilled enough, fit enough, and prepared enough, you could cheat death. July 27, 2024, proved us wrong. It proved that skill is not a shield. It proved that experience is not armor. Hirad and Nakajima did everything right. They were the masters of their craft, and the mountain killed them anyway. It is a humbling reminder of our utter insignificance. 2K2, these 2 brilliant men were nothing more than dust on a windshield. So, what is the legacy of the silent fall? It is a warning. It is a line in the sand, or rather, a line in the snow. It tells the next generation of climbers that the west face is not a prize to be won. It is a dragon that has not yet been slain. It tells us that no matter how much we optimize, analyze, and prepare, the anomaly is always waiting. As the sun sets on the Karakoram tonight, the shadows lengthen over the west face. The wind picks up, howling through the rock bands at 7,000 meters. The temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero. Down in the valley, life goes on. Up there, time has stopped. Kazuya Hirad and Kenro Nakajima are now part of the mountain they loved. They are the sentinels of the west face. They are the permanent reminder that the line between a pilot, and a grave is as thin as a single strand of nylon rope. This story doesn't have a happy ending. True stories about K2 rarely do, but it has a truth, and that truth is what we search for on this channel. We don't just look at the summit photos. We look at the scars. We look at the price paid for the view. If this investigation opened your eyes to the brutal reality of high-altitude mountaineering, if you value stories that dig deeper than the headlines and respect the harsh truth of the death zone, then you are in the right place. There are hundreds of bodies on the 8,000-meter peaks, and each one has a story that the wind is trying to erase. We are here to make sure those stories are heard. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications for K2 stories. Next week, we are opening the file on the Savage Mountain's most controversial season in history. You do not want to miss it. Until then, respect the mountain and stay safe.